Edinburgh Castle, the fortress of blood and crowns. Welcome. Today I am going to tell you a story that will make you see one of the world's most famous castles in a completely different way. You might have heard about Edinburgh Castle before. Maybe you know it as that dramatic fortress sitting on a volcanic rock in Scotland, a tourist attraction with bagpipes and tartan, or simply as a beautiful medieval castle. But today, I am going to tell you the real story, the story of blood, betrayal, imprisonment, and survival. Edinburgh Castle is not just an old building. It is a witness to 3,000 years of human history. It is a place where kings were born and queens were imprisoned, where battles were fought and murders were committed, where the crown jewels were hidden and heroes were executed. A fortress so important that whoever controlled it controlled Scotland itself. After listening to this, you will be shocked to know how one volcanic rock became the stage for some of the most dramatic moments in British history. And this is not just a history lesson. This is a perfect story for your English listening practice. So sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey through time, a journey of power, survival, bloodshed, and the indomitable spirit of Scotland. Now let's begin. The rock that changed everything. To understand Edinburgh Castle, we must first understand the rock it sits on. Castle Rock is not an ordinary hill. It is the plug of an extinct volcano that erupted 350 million years ago. When glaciers carved through Scotland during the Ice Age, they flowed around this volcanic rock, unable to erode its hard basalt. The result is a natural fortress, sheer cliffs on three sides, rising 443 feet above sea level, with only one narrow approach from the east. Imagine standing at the base of this rock 3,000 years ago. You are a Bronze Age settler looking for a place to build a home. Where would you choose? Somewhere defensible, somewhere you can see enemies approaching from miles away, somewhere protected by nature itself. This is exactly what the ancient peoples of Scotland thought. Archaeological evidence shows that humans have occupied Castle Rock since at least 900 BC. These early settlers built wooden forts at the summit, taking advantage of the natural defenses. From up there, they could see across the Firth of Forth to the north, across rolling hills to the south, and watch the ancient trails that would one day become roads connecting Scotland to England. But life on this rock was hard. Water had to be carried up steep paths, food had to be stored carefully, every stone for building had to be hauled to the summit. Yet people stayed because the alternative was worse. In ancient Scotland, being defenseless meant being conquered. Being conquered meant losing everything, your land, your freedom, perhaps your life. The rock became more than just a home. It became a symbol, a statement, a declaration that said, "We will not be easy to defeat." And for the next 3,000 years, countless armies would try. The birth of a fortress. The first historical mention of a castle on this rock comes from the 11th century, though scholars believe fortifications existed much earlier. By the 1100s, Edinburgh Castle had become a royal residence. Scottish kings and queens lived here, holding court in the Great Hall, storing treasures in the vaults, and using the castle as a base of power. But Castle Rock's strategic importance made it a target. England and Scotland were constantly at war during the Middle Ages. The English wanted to control Scotland, the Scots wanted independence, and Edinburgh Castle stood at the center of this centuries-long struggle. In 1296, King Edward I of England, known as Longshanks or the Hammer of the Scots, invaded Scotland. His armies swept through the country, crushing resistance. Edinburgh Castle, defended by Scottish forces, held out for just 3 days before surrendering. Edward was ruthless. He didn't just want to defeat Scotland, he wanted to humiliate it. He took the Stone of Destiny, the ancient coronation stone of Scottish kings, and carried it back to England as a trophy. But the Scottish spirit was not so easily broken. A man named William Wallace emerged, leading a rebellion that inspired the Scottish people. Though Wallace was eventually captured and brutally executed, his resistance sparked something that would not die. Then came Robert the Bruce. The legend of Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce is to Scotland what George Washington is to America, the father of the nation, the warrior who refused to surrender, the leader who achieved the impossible. But his story is far more complex than most people know. Bruce was not always a Scottish hero. In fact, early in his life, he fought for the English. He was a nobleman caught between two worlds, his Scottish heritage and his English lands. But in 1306, he made a decision that changed everything. After murdering his rival John Cummin in a church, he declared himself King of Scotland. It was a desperate move. He had little support. The English wanted him dead. Even many Scots opposed him. He was crowned in a rushed ceremony with a makeshift crown. Within months, his small army was crushed by English forces. Bruce became a fugitive, hiding in the Highlands, watching his brothers executed, his wife and daughter imprisoned. This is when the famous spider story supposedly happened. According to legend, Bruce was hiding in a cave, defeated and ready to give up. He watched a spider trying to spin a web, failing again and again. But the spider kept trying. On its 7th attempt, it succeeded. Bruce decided that if a spider would not surrender, neither would he.
Whether this story is true or legend doesn't matter. What matters is what Bruce did next. He fought back. For 8 years, Bruce waged guerrilla warfare against the English. He avoided large battles he couldn't win. Instead, he attacked supply lines, raided settlements, and gradually wore down English control. His most brilliant tactic was destroying castles after capturing them, denying the English fortified positions to hold Scotland. But Edinburgh Castle posed a problem. It was too strong to capture by direct assault. The rock was too steep, the walls were too thick, the English garrison too well supplied. So Bruce sent Thomas Randolph, his nephew and one of his best commanders, to take the castle through cunning rather than force. The daring midnight raid. On a dark night in March 1314, 30 Scottish soldiers gathered at the base of Castle Rock. They were led by a man named William Francis, who had served in the castle garrison and knew a secret. There was a path up the north side of the rock, a steep, dangerous route that the English believed was unclimbable. Francis had used this path before for a different purpose, to sneak out of the castle at night to visit his lover in the town below. Now he would use it to bring Scotland's army inside. The climb was terrifying. The men used rope ladders and climbing equipment, ascending the sheer cliff face in complete darkness. One slip meant death. One sound would alert the English guards above. But the Scots were desperate. Scotland's independence hung in the balance. They reached the top. Silently they climbed over the wall. The English guards, comfortable in their supposedly impregnable fortress, were caught completely by surprise. The Scots attacked, opening the gates for the rest of Randolph's forces waiting below. The castle fell, and Robert the Bruce, true to his strategy, ordered it destroyed. The walls were torn down, the buildings were burned. If the English wanted Edinburgh Castle, they would find only ruins. 3 months later, Bruce won his greatest victory at the Battle of Bannockburn, crushing an English army 3 times the size of his own. Scotland had won its independence, and Robert the Bruce became a legend. But the story of Edinburgh Castle was far from over. The curse of Mary, Queen of Scots. Fast forward 250 years to one of the most tragic and fascinating figures in British history, Mary, Queen of Scots. Her story is so dramatic, so filled with murder, romance, scandal, and betrayal that it seems like fiction, but it is all real. And Edinburgh Castle played a crucial role in her fate. Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old, after her father, King James V, died. As a baby, she was too young to rule, so Scotland was governed by regents. For her safety, she was sent to France at age 5, where she grew up in the French court, learning languages, music, and the arts of royal life. At 15, she married the French prince Francis, who became King Francis II. For a brief moment, she was queen of both France and Scotland. But Francis died after just 17 months. At 18, Mary was a widow. She decided to return to Scotland, a country she barely remembered, to rule her kingdom. Scotland in 1561 was a different world from the French court. It was rougher, poorer, deeply divided by religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Mary was Catholic, but Scotland had become predominantly Protestant during her absence. She arrived to a country suspicious of her religion, her French upbringing, and her claim to the English throne, which threatened Queen Elizabeth I. But Mary was intelligent, charming, and determined to rule well. For a few years, things went smoothly. Then she made a series of disastrous decisions involving men. Her second husband, Lord Darnley, was handsome but arrogant, violent, and drunk with power. He became jealous of Mary's secretary, David Rizzio, believing Mary was having an affair with him. On March 9, 1566, Darnley and a group of conspirators burst into Mary's private chambers at the palace of Holyrood House. They dragged Rizzio away from a terrified Mary, who was 6 months pregnant, and stabbed him 56 times. Mary was traumatized, but she was also pregnant with a child who would one day unite the crowns of Scotland and England. She needed a safe place to give birth, somewhere defensible, somewhere no assassins could reach her. She chose Edinburgh Castle. On June 19, 1566, in a tiny room at the castle, Mary gave birth to a son, James. The room still exists today, barely large enough for a bed and a few attendants. You can visit it and see where one of Britain's most important monarchs was born. But Mary's troubles were only beginning. Less than a year later, Lord Darnley was murdered in a mysterious explosion. Many suspected Mary's new lover, the Earl of Bothwell, was responsible. Within 3 months, Mary married Bothwell, scandalizing Scotland and seeming to confirm the worst suspicions. The Scottish nobles rebelled. Mary was forced to abdicate in favor of her baby son, James. She was imprisoned, then escaped to England, hoping Queen Elizabeth would help her. Instead, Elizabeth, fearing Mary's claim to the English throne, kept her prisoner for 19 years, before finally ordering her execution in 1587. Her head was cut off with an axe. It took 3 strikes. She was 44 years old. But her son, James, the 6th of Scotland, survived. He was raised at Edinburgh Castle under the protection of powerful regents. And in 1603, when Queen Elizabeth died without children, James became King James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England for the first time. Edinburgh Castle had protected the infant who would change British history forever. The prison of despair. But Edinburgh Castle was not just a royal residence and military fortress, it was also one of Britain's most feared prisons. For centuries, the castle's dungeons held prisoners of war, political rebels, and condemned men awaiting execution. The conditions were horrific. Prisoners were kept in dark, damp vaults carved into the volcanic rock. There was little light, no heating, minimal food. Many prisoners carved their names or messages into the stone walls, desperate to leave some mark that they had existed. These carvings can still be seen today, silent testimonies to human suffering.
During the 7 Years' War and the American Revolutionary War, hundreds of French and American prisoners were held at Edinburgh Castle. They were crammed into the vaults, dozens of men in spaces meant for a handful. Disease spread rapidly. Many died from typhus, pneumonia, and simple starvation. Some prisoners went mad from the isolation and darkness. Others became dangerously violent. Guards were afraid to enter certain cells alone. The castle developed a reputation for being haunted, with reports of ghostly figures, unexplained sounds, and sudden drops in temperature in specific locations. But some prisoners refused to be broken. They organized themselves, created secret communication systems, and maintained discipline. French officers held mock courts-martial, maintaining military structure even in captivity. American sailors sang songs of freedom and planned impossible escapes. One famous prisoner was a French soldier who spent years carving an intricate model ship from beef bones, using stolen tools and working by candlelight. The ship, complete with tiny masts, rigging, and cannons, still exists in the Castle Museum. It is a testament to human resilience. Even in the darkest circumstances, humans create art. The prison vaults are now tourist attractions, but walking through them still evokes a sense of dread. The stone walls seem to absorb light. The air feels heavy. You can almost hear the echoes of men who suffered and died in these spaces, far from home, buried in unmarked graves. Edinburgh Castle holds many secrets, but its secrets as a prison are among the darkest. The castle that wouldn't fall. Throughout its history, Edinburgh Castle has been besieged, captured, and recaptured more than 20 times. It has been held by Scots, English, and even briefly by French forces. Armies have battered its walls with cannons, undermined its foundations with tunnels, and attempted to starve its defenders into submission. Yet the castle always survived, damaged, sometimes destroyed, but always rebuilt, because controlling Edinburgh Castle meant controlling Scotland. One of the most dramatic sieges occurred in 1573 during the reign of young King James VI. A group of supporters of the exiled Mary, Queen of Scots, held the castle, refusing to surrender. They believed Mary would return to reclaim her throne. The English, supporting James, sent artillery and military engineers to reduce the fortress. For over 2 years the defenders held out. Food ran low, water became scarce, disease spread, but they would not surrender. Finally, English cannons pounded the walls day and night, creating breaches. Mines were dug beneath the fortifications, filled with gunpowder, and detonated. Sections of the castle collapsed. Still, the defenders fought on. But eventually, starvation and disease did what military force could not. The garrison surrendered. The leaders were hanged. The castle, once again, was rebuilt. This cycle of destruction and reconstruction continued for centuries. Each time the castle was damaged, it was made stronger. New walls were added. Artillery platforms were constructed. The defenses evolved to meet new threats. By the 1700s, Edinburgh Castle had become so formidable that it was considered virtually impregnable. No army seriously attempted to capture it during the Jacobite rebellions, when Scottish clans tried to restore the Stuart dynasty to the British throne. The castle stood as a symbol of British military power in Scotland. But its role was changing. As artillery became more powerful and warfare evolved, medieval castles became obsolete. Edinburgh Castle remained important as a garrison, a prison, and a symbol, but its days as an active battlefield fortress were ending. The crown jewels and the stone of destiny. Inside Edinburgh Castle, hidden away from invading armies and political turmoil, are some of Scotland's most precious treasures. These are not just valuable objects, they are symbols of Scottish identity, independence, and sovereignty. The honours of Scotland, also called the Scottish Crown Jewels, are the oldest crown jewels in Britain. The crown was remodeled for James V in 1540, incorporating gold from the original crown made for Robert the Bruce. The sceptre and sword were gifts from popes to earlier Scottish kings. Together, they represent Scotland's status as an ancient, independent kingdom. But these treasures have their own dramatic story.
In 1651, during the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell's forces invaded Scotland. Knowing that Cromwell would seize or destroy the crown jewels, Scottish loyalists smuggled them out of Edinburgh Castle, hidden in sacks of wool. For nearly a decade, they were concealed in a church, buried beneath the floor while Cromwell's soldiers searched everywhere for them. After Cromwell's death and the restoration of the monarchy, the honors were returned to Edinburgh Castle. But in 1707, when Scotland and England officially united to form Great Britain, the crown jewels were locked away in a sealed room. For nearly a century, they were forgotten. People assumed they had been taken to London or destroyed. Then, in 1818, the famous writer Sir Walter Scott convinced the British government to search for the lost treasures. A locked room in the castle was opened, and there, covered in dust, sitting in an oak chest, were the honors of Scotland, exactly where they had been left 111 years earlier. Today, they are displayed in the Crown Room, protected by thick glass and security systems, viewed by more than 1 million visitors each year. And there's another treasure. In 1996, the British government returned the Stone of Destiny to Scotland. This is the ancient stone that Edward I stole in 1296, the stone on which Scottish kings were crowned for centuries. It had been under the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey for 700 years, used in the coronation of every British monarch. Its return to Scotland was deeply emotional for many Scots. It symbolized respect for Scottish history and identity. The stone now sits in the Crown Room alongside the honors, finally home after 7 centuries in England.
But there's a twist to this story. Some historians believe the stone in Westminster Abbey was a fake, that clever Scottish monks switched it with an ordinary piece of sandstone when Edward I's soldiers came to seize it. They believe the real Stone of Destiny, an ancient symbol connected to Ireland, Scotland's early kings, and possibly even biblical legends, remains hidden somewhere in Scotland. True or not, the legend persists, because Edinburgh Castle is a place where legends and history intertwined so completely that separating them becomes impossible. The castle today. Today, Edinburgh Castle is Scotland's most visited tourist attraction, drawing over 2 million people annually. But it is more than just a museum. It remains an active military garrison, home to the Royal Regiment of Scotland and other military organizations. Soldiers still live and work within its walls. Every day at exactly 1 p.m., the 1 o'clock gun fires from the castle ramparts. This tradition began in 1861 as a time signal for ships in the Firth of Forth. The sound echoes across Edinburgh, a daily reminder of the castle's presence and its connection to the city's identity. The castle hosts military ceremonies, state functions, and the famous Edinburgh Military Tattoo, an annual festival featuring military bands, performers, and spectacular displays against the castle's dramatic backdrop. Over 200,000 people attend the tattoo each year, watching bagpipers, drummers, and performers from around the world. But perhaps the most powerful experience at Edinburgh Castle is simply standing on the battlements at sunset, looking out across Edinburgh. The city spreads below you, the medieval old town with its narrow closes and ancient buildings, the elegant Georgian new town with its broad streets and neoclassical architecture, and beyond, the waters of the Firth of Forth, glittering in the fading light. From this vantage point, you understand why this rock was so important. You can see for miles. You can imagine watching for approaching armies, lighting signal fires, defending Scotland against impossible odds. You can feel the weight of 3,000 years of human history pressing down on the volcanic stone beneath your feet. And you understand that Edinburgh Castle is not just a building. It is the physical embodiment of Scotland's story, its struggles for independence, its complex relationship with England, its pride, its resilience, its refusal to be conquered or forgotten.
Conclusion: the eternal fortress. So we come to the end of our journey through Edinburgh Castle's incredible history. From Bronze Age settlers to Robert the Bruce, from Mary, Queen of Scots to modern military ceremonies, this fortress has witnessed the full sweep of Scottish history. It has been destroyed and rebuilt, besieged and defended, a royal palace and a prison, a treasure house and a military base. But through all these changes, one thing has remained constant: its symbolic importance. Edinburgh Castle represents something essential about Scotland. It sits on an ancient volcanic rock shaped by fire and ice, unmovable and permanent. It has survived countless attempts to destroy it. It has adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its core identity. It stands as a reminder that some things endure. When you visit Edinburgh Castle today, you walk in the footsteps of kings and queens, soldiers and prisoners, heroes and villains. You stand where Robert the Bruce stood after winning Scotland's independence. You see the tiny room where the future King James I was born. You walk through dungeons that held desperate men far from home. You see the crown jewels that represent centuries of sovereignty. But more than that, you feel something. A sense of connection to the past, a recognition that history is not abstract dates and distant events, but the accumulated stories of real people who lived, fought, loved, and died in this place. Edinburgh Castle is not just Scotland's fortress, it is Scotland's memory, carved in stone and rising above the city like a reminder of everything Scotland has been and continues to be. It is a place of blood and crowns, battles and births, darkness and light. It is a monument to human endurance. It is Edinburgh Castle, and it will stand forever.